everyone, welcome to this week's Halton Hills housing update. So the start of January has actually been pretty good. When we're looking at the numbers, it is trending in a way that is pretty common for January. So when we look at Georgetown last week, we had 8 sales, which is a good number. I mean, it's not as high as the 12 that we saw last week, but 8 and above is really showing that the buyers are active. Our market is not dead in terms of buyers, and we have quite a lot of properties in the sold conditional status. So that is indicating that things are definitely moving on the buyer side. We had 11 new listings last week, so it's higher than our sales. We are still seeing properties exiting, which I'll get to, which is helping our inventory stay down. But 11 new listings is indicating that the sellers are coming back to the market. There was quite a few that had come off before Christmas that re-entered the market this week. I count them as new listings because there's been a gap. We definitely are not seeing a huge amount of listings. Like, we had lots of weeks where we saw 20 plus new listings. We're not there yet, and buyer activity is decent. So far, we are in a good spot in terms of inventory because it's actually going down. So now looking at the other markets, Acton saw 1 sale and no new listings. There was no sales and no new listings in Glen Williams, and there was 1 sale and 5 new listings in the rural market. But some things to note when we're looking at the properties that came off and terminated, relisted, adjusted their price, all that fun stuff. There was 18 properties impacted this week. Of those 18, 1 relisted at the same, 1 raised their price, don't know. And 8 of them came back on the market at a reduced price, and 8 of them exited the market. So we are still seeing people leaving the market and not entering. And that is definitely something that we don't see a ton of usually in January. That's usually like a December thing, but the market isn't giving people necessarily what they want just yet. So we are seeing people still exiting, and so that is helping inventory stay at bay. Another thing to note, of the 10 properties that sold in Halton Hills last week, 7 of them were over $1 million. So we were talking last week about how the far majority of properties that sold were over $1 million, and the same this week, like 70% of the properties that sold were over $1 million. That is a shift and something we're going to be watching closely, because that's usually our price point that isn't moving so rapidly. So kind of interesting to see that and not seeing the lower price points fueling that, because the lower price points aren't flying off the shelf right now. So kind of a shift, and I do wonder if that has to do with the new rules with the insured mortgages up to 1.5. So that is good news for our higher price point sellers. Like, that's all going to trickle upwards in terms of if people feel confident that they can move their $1.2 million house, they're going to move up to that 1.6, 1.7. So it's really interesting to see that trend for the last few weeks, and I'm going to be watching that closely because that's really interesting to me. It's just not our norm. So let's see what happens. So now looking at active inventory, all of Halton Hills is down from 120 to 119 active listings. So not a crazy drop, but it definitely is going in a direction that is favorable. It is not skyrocketing. We're almost 100 less listings than we were seeing for the majority of 2024. So we're in a much better place, and our sales are in a much better spot too. So let's just be excited for where we're at with inventory right now. Georgetown is down also from 72 to 70 active listings. And again, I've talked about there's a bunch of new condos that are technically in the resale market now. And if we didn't have those, like, we'd be in the 60s, and our inventory is usually feeling pretty scarce when we're there, and buyer demand usually starts to get pent up. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens like between now and the end of February. Looking at our price points, under 800,000 remained the same this week at 11 active listings. 800 to $1 million is up from 14 to 18. So that's really interesting because that's our pocket that usually moves quite a bit, and I mean, it's climbing right now. So that's going to be something really interesting to watch. I don't know where our lower price point buyers are at the moment, but the trend right now is that everyone seems to want properties that are over $1 million. So those higher price point buyers are out. And again, I do think it has to do with the buying power of buyers has increased because their down payment requirements are so much less, between 1 and 1.5 million. And now looking at those numbers, 1 to 1.5 million is down from 25 to 22 active listings. And like I said, quite a few in the sold conditional status in that pocket. 1.5 million plus is down from 22 to 19 active listings. So inventory overall over that $1 million mark is much lower than we are used to seeing. Like combined through the summer, I think we had like 90 listings over 1 million in Georgetown, and now we're sitting at like 40. So it's a huge difference. Gonna be watching that trend. I'm very fascinated in what's gonna happen here. Now looking at Acton this week, Acton is down from 9 to 8 active listings. There is like nothing available in Acton. You've got a couple lower ones, a couple middle ones, but there's just not a lot available. So that's also a shift, because we were over 30 active listings there a few months ago. Glen Williams this week is down from 6 to 5 active listings, which is a normal number for the Glen. And the rural market is up from 33 to 36 active listings. That is a market that is hopefully going to benefit from our $1 million plus sales happening, because most of the properties in the rural market are that higher price point. And when town starts to get scarce, we start to see rural pick up. So those will be trends that we're looking for through like the first 2 quarters of 2025. Overall, when I look at this update, it's not the scarcity we've seen in previous years in January, but it's definitely like a soft market in terms of inventory. It is where our market, I find, starts to simmer and get a little busier. If we see a rate reduction at the end of January, I think that's really going to increase buyer confidence going into this year. And I do think that we're going to fast forward 4 weeks from now, and there's a lot of people that are not pulling the trigger. They're sitting on the fence. They think some things are overpriced right now, and they're going to be regretting that, because as inventory starts to get eaten up, we're going to start to see that demand come into the spring, and buyers are active, and naturally we start to see bidding wars happening in February and March, and that's when our prices start to climb. So I like to remind buyers that now is a really good time to be thinking about looking at what the properties are and thinking about where they could go in the coming months if we just start to see a little bit more demand from the buyer side. So overall, I think positive update for January. If you are a seller, start thinking about getting your property on the market, especially if you are in Acton. That is super low. And we're gonna have to see how January's numbers wash out, because I think with all of these sales over $1 million, I think we're going to have a huge jump in our average price point versus the last few months. And I think that's just going to continue through in 2025. So we will see what happens. I will be back next week. Have a great week, everyone.